The great chamber of Zenthara Prime floated in the darkness between stars, a monument to galactic civilization built over 50 millennia. Inside, beneath vaulted ceilings that displayed the swirling colors of 1,000 nebulae, 850 representatives from across known space gathered for what most considered a routine administrative session. Ambassador Chen Wei stood in the center of the speaking circle, her small human frame dwarfed by the towering Chthoni delegates to her left and the crystalline Vaxil observers to her right. She had been speaking for 20 minutes, her voice steady despite the growing murmur of dismissive clicks and whistles from the assembled delegates. For 217 years, humanity has served this council faithfully, Chen said, her hands clasped behind her back, in a posture of forced calm. We have maintained your hyperlane networks, repaired your stations, managed your logistical systems. We have asked only for what was promised: a path to full membership, a voice in the decisions that shape our galaxy. A harsh, barking laugh erupted from the Chthoni section. Delegate Veshtar, his reptilian features twisted in amusement, didn't bother to wait for recognition before speaking. Maintained? Managed? His translator rendered his words with dripping condescension. You perform the tasks assigned to you. A waste reclamation unit also performs its function. Should we grant it a vote? Scattered laughter rippled through the chamber. Shen's jaw tightened, but she continued. We have submitted 14 proposals for technological collaboration. We have offered humanitarian aid during the Sector 7 famine. We have trained 300 council species in advanced repair techniques. We have earned. The voice belonged to Councillor Shess of the Vaxil Consortium, their crystalline body refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. Species earn their place through cultural achievement, through philosophical contribution, through the advancement of galactic knowledge. You fix machines. You follow instruction manuals written by your betters. Chen pulled a data tablet from her jacket. I have documented evidence that human engineers have increased hyperlane efficiency by 18%. That human medical researchers contributed to the cure for Thalonian plague. That human, enough. The word came from High Arbiter Zelnoth, the ancient being who presided over council sessions from a throne of living metal. Their voice carried the weight of authority, accumulated over 3,000 years. The Council has considered your petition, Ambassador Chen. We now move to vote on Resolution 7743. Chen's hands trembled slightly. She had known this moment was coming, had felt it building in the dismissive glances and delayed meetings over the past year. But knowing and experiencing were different things. Resolution 7743, Zelnoth continued, proposes the formal reclassification of humanity from probationary membership to service caste status. This designation reflects the species' demonstrated aptitude for technical labor and maintenance tasks while acknowledging their limited contribution to higher galactic culture and governance. The words struck Chen like physical blows. Service caste. It was a polite term for what it really meant. Permanent subordination, breeding restrictions, no legal recourse, no future. The resolution further stipulates population management protocols to ensure optimal workforce levels without resource strain on council territories. Human settlements will be reorganized to maximize efficiency of service distribution. Educational systems will be restructured to focus on technical training appropriate to caste designation. Chen found her voice, though it came out rougher than she intended. You're talking about treating us as property. We are talking about recognizing reality, Councillor Shess said. Every species has its place in the galactic order. Some lead, some discover, some build, and some maintain what others have built. There is no shame in this, Ambassador. Accept your nature. Our nature? Chen looked around the chamber, meeting eyes and optical sensors and sensory organs she couldn't even name. Our nature is to be free, to choose our own path. That is the nature of any sentient species. Then you misunderstand sentience, Veshtar said. Sentience alone does not grant equality. A child is sentient, yet we do not let children govern. Your species is young, limited. In time, perhaps in another 10,000 years, you may evolve beyond your current limitations. But today, you are what you are. Zelnoth's voice cut through the murmuring that followed. The vote will now commence. All in favor of Resolution 7743? The chamber lit up with affirmative signals. Blue lights, resonant tones, pheromone bursts that Chen's translator rendered as yes votes. She watched them cascade across the chamber like a wave of rejection. Opposed? 3 lights. Just 3, out of 850 delegates. Species that had worked closely with humans, that had seen beyond the prejudice. 3 voices crying out in a wilderness of contempt. Resolution 7743 passes with overwhelming support. Ambassador Chen, you will coordinate with the Transition Authority to begin implementation of no. The word dropped into the chamber like a stone into still water. Zelnoth's ancient eyes fixed on Chen with something that might have been surprise. No? The High Arbiter repeated. Chen straightened her shoulders. She thought of the millions of humans scattered across Council space. Engineers deep in the guts of space stations, medics in remote colonies, teachers, technicians, mothers and fathers and children who had believed in the promise of equality. She thought of the message she had prepared, encrypted and ready, waiting only for her authorization code. You have made your decision, Chen said, her voice carrying now, steady and clear. Now we make ours. Humanity withdraws its consent. We withdraw our participation. We withdraw our labor. Effective immediately, every human in Council space will cease their duties and return to human territory. Laughter erupted, louder this time. Veshtar was practically howling. You withdraw? You have no territory. You have nothing except what we permit you to have. Chen smiled, and there was something in that smile that made the laughter falter. You really believe that? You think we've spent 2 centuries in your systems, touching every piece of your infrastructure, learning every detail of your technology, and we made no preparations? You think we're that simple? She reached into her jacket and withdrew a small device. With deliberate slowness, she entered a code. Across the galaxy, 200 million human communicators chimed simultaneously with an encrypted message. The message was simple. Resolution 7743 passed. Execute protocol withdrawal. Come home. Within 1 hour, Chen said, every human engineer will step away from their posts. Every maintenance schedule will go unfilled. Every repair queue will empty. You wanted to see what we're worth. You're about to find out. She turned and walked toward the chamber's exit. Behind her, the mockery had died, replaced by confused murmuring. You cannot do this, Zelnoth called after her. Legal obligations. Chen paused at the doorway and looked back one last time. We had a contract, she said quietly. You just broke it. Good luck fixing your galaxy without us. The door sealed behind her with a soft hiss. In the chamber, silence fell like a shroud, as the delegates began to realize that the ambassador had not been bluffing. Across Council space, humans were already moving, packing their tools, gathering their families, and disappearing into ships that appeared seemingly from nowhere. 3 months after Ambassador Chen Wei walked out of the Council chamber, Station Administrator Corvin stood in the Environmental Control Center of Trading Post Epsilon 7, staring at readouts that made no sense. The atmospheric processors were degrading, oxygen levels dropping by 0.3% per day. It was a slow death, but certain. Show me the maintenance logs, Corvin said to his assistant, a young Pelthian named Suvek. Suvek manipulated the holographic display with his four-fingered hands, pulling up records that stretched back decades. The logs were meticulous, detailed, and utterly incomprehensible. Every entry was written in what Corvin now recognized as Standard English, one of the human languages that had been permitted for technical documentation. "Can you translate this?" Corvin asked. "The words, yes," Suvek replied, his voice uncertain. "But the meaning," he highlighted a section. "This entry says, compensated for pressure valve drift using reverse flow modification per Chen-Patterson protocol, adjusted thermal coupling to maintain equilibrium with secondary systems. I know what each word means, Administrator, but I don't know what they did." Corvin felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. The feeling had become familiar over the past 3 months. "Pull up the technical manual for the atmospheric processors." The manual appeared, 8,000 pages written primarily in human languages, with occasional sections translated into Galactic Common. Corvin opened a random page and found himself looking at a diagram labeled Tertiary Bypass Integration Network. The diagram showed dozens of components connected by color-coded lines, with notes and margins written in at least 4 different human languages. "Why didn't we notice this before?" Suvek asked quietly. "Because they were here," Corvin said. "The humans, they just fix things. We never had to look at the manuals." The communicator on his desk chimed. Corvin activated it, and the tired face of Chief Engineer Veltra appeared, her scales looking duller than usual. "Administrator, I have an update on the repairs. It's not good." "Tell me." "We've been trying to implement the standard atmospheric processor maintenance protocol from the Council Engineering database. The problem is that the protocol doesn't match the actual system. These processors have been modified extensively. There are components that don't appear in any official schematic. There are connections that shouldn't work, according to Council physics." Corvin leaned forward. "What do you mean, shouldn't work?" "I mean that according to our engineering principles, some of these systems should have failed catastrophically years ago. But they didn't, because the humans were doing something, compensating somehow, in ways we don't understand. They weren't just maintaining the station, Administrator. They were holding it together." The weight in Corvin's stomach became a void. "How long until complete system failure?" "At current degradation rates, 6 weeks, maybe 7. After Veltra disconnected, Corvin sat in silence. He pulled up the galactic news feeds and began reading. The stories painted a picture that was repeated across Council space, with variations, but always the same essential theme. On Nexus Station Beta, the hyperlane navigation system had collapsed. Engineers discovered that the humans had been manually correcting quantum drift for 17 years, compensating for a design flaw that the original Prelian builders had never documented. Without those corrections, ships entering hyperspace were off-target by millions of kilometers. In the Kepler sector, 30 mining operations had shut down. The humans who operated the complex extraction systems were gone, and the remaining workers couldn't make sense of the machinery. One mining supervisor had been quoted saying, "We thought they were just pushing buttons. Turns out, they were performing calculations in their heads that our computers can't replicate." On Zenthara Prime itself, the Council's home station, garbage was piling up. The waste reclamation systems, managed entirely by humans for 2 centuries, were failing. The remaining engineers had discovered that the systems required constant adjustment, micro-corrections made dozens of times per day. Without humans making those corrections, waste was backing up into ventilation systems. Corvin's communicator chimed again. This time, it was an emergency broadcast from the Council itself. High Arbiter Zelnoth's ancient face filled the screen. "Attention all Council stations and facilities. This is a priority directive. Any station experiencing technical difficulties related to maintenance systems should immediately contact the Council Engineering Authority for assistance. We are assembling specialist teams to address the temporary disruptions caused by the recent human workforce departure. Additionally, we are issuing an official summons for human representatives to appear before the Council to discuss terms of contract dispute resolution. This summons carries full legal authority under Council Charter, Section 73. The broadcast ended. Corvin pulled up his own communication system and tried to send a message to the human engineering team that had worked on Epsilon 7 for 30 years. The message bounced back immediately. Address not found. Recipient database entry deleted. He tried 5 more humans he had worked with over the years. Every message returned the same error. It was as if humanity had erased itself from the Council's communication networks entirely. Over the following weeks, Corvin watched his station slowly die. The oxygen levels continued to drop despite every effort his engineers made. They tried everything they could think of, but each fix seemed to cause 3 new problems. The systems were interconnected in ways they hadn't understood, with one system depending on another in chains of causation that became clear only when they broke. On day 47 after the withdrawal, Corvin authorized the evacuation of Epsilon 7. 2,000 residents boarded transport ships, carrying what they could, leaving behind a station that had stood for 300 years. As his ship pulled away, Corvin looked back at the structure, its lights already dimming as power systems failed. Epsilon 7 was not unique. Reports flooded the Council networks daily. Trade routes closed. Colonies going dark. The Galactic Council's vast network of civilization was contracting, folding in on itself, as the maintenance and logistics that humanity had provided vanished. In the Council chambers, delegates who had laughed at Ambassador Chen now shouted at each other, demanding solutions that didn't exist. Councillor Chess of the Vaxel Consortium stood before the assembly and declared, "We must find the humans. We must bring them back." But no one knew where humanity had gone. Their home system had been deliberately obscured in Council records, hidden behind layers of bureaucratic misdirection that the humans had filed over 2 centuries. Search parties were organized, ships sent to explore regions of space that might harbor human settlements. All returned empty-handed. Corvin, now unemployed and living in a refugee center on a core world, spent his evenings reading everything he could find about humanity. He learned that they had never shared their true history with the Council. He learned that humans had arrived in Council space from a completely different vector than they had claimed. He learned that every detail of their presentation had been carefully calculated to make them appear useful but not threatening. One night, he found a video from the archives. It showed Ambassador Chen during her first appearance before the Council, 200 years earlier. She was younger, her face hopeful, her voice earnest, as she describes humanity's desire to join galactic civilization. Corvin watched the video, and then watched it again. The second time, he noticed something in Chen's eyes. Even then, even at that first meeting, there had been a wariness there. A calculation, as if she had already known how this would end. "You knew," Corvin whispered to the recorded image, "you knew we would reject you, and you planned for it." The video ended with young Ambassador Chen bowing to the Council, thanking them for their consideration, promising that humanity would prove worthy of their trust. Corvin turned off the display and sat in darkness, listening to the sounds of thousands of other displaced beings in the refugee center. Outside, a core world that had stood at the center of galactic civilization for 20,000 years struggled to maintain basic services. The temporary disruption was becoming permanent, and humanity was nowhere to be found. 1 year after the withdrawal, Councillor Veshtar stood in the observation deck of the warship Dominant Faith, watching the swirling blue and green planet that intelligence suggested was called Earth. His claws gripped the railing with enough force to leave scratches in the metal. Status report, he commanded. Captain Relis, a disciplined military officer who had served the Krythani fleet for 40 years, consulted her tactical display. The system is heavily fortified, Counselor. We count at least 200 defensive platforms in orbit around the primary world. There are significant installations on the system's fourth planet and several moons. We detect multiple shipyards under construction. Veshtar stared at the defenses. Each platform bristled with weapons he didn't recognize, arranged in patterns that suggested sophistication far beyond what humans should possess. They've been busy. More than busy, Counselor. They are rapidly preparing for something we cannot yet fully measure. Our analysts estimate this level of construction would take most species 300 years. They've done it in less than one, even accounting for hidden preparation time. Then they had help. Someone else supplied them with technology. Captain Relis shook her head. With respect, Counselor, our intelligence disagrees. The technology signatures don't match any known species. These are human designs. Veshtar's translator rendered his growl as simple frustration. But the sound carried more than that. It carried the beginning of fear. Behind him, the 50 ships of the diplomatic expedition waited in formation. Not an invasion force. The Council had been very clear about that. This was merely a show of strength to convince the humans to return to the negotiating table. Open a communication channel, Veshtar ordered. The main display shifted to show a human woman sitting in what appeared to be a simple office. She was young, perhaps 30 years old by human reckoning, with dark skin and gray eyes that held no trace of intimidation despite facing down a fleet. I am Counselor Veshtar of the Krythani Sovereignty, acting as chief negotiator for the Galactic Council. Identify yourself. Sarah Okonkwo, the woman said. Her voice was calm, almost pleasant. Diplomatic coordinator for the Human Commonwealth. Welcome to Sol System, Counselor. Though I notice you didn't request permission to enter our space. Veshtar felt his scales bristle. The Council requires no permission to— You're not in Council space, Sarah interrupted, her tone still pleasant but carrying steel underneath. You're in human space. Our space. You want to be here? You ask nicely. But since you've come such a long way, I'll overlook the breach of protocol. What can we do for you? Behind Veshtar, several officers muttered in surprise at the human's audacity. He silenced them with a gesture. You know why we're here. The withdrawal must end. The Council has authorized me to offer full membership, immediate and unconditional. No probationary period. Full voting rights, reparations for any grievances, and a formal public apology from the High Arbiter himself. Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering the offer. Then she smiled. No. No, Veshtar's voice rose. You refuse full membership? Everything your people wanted for 2 centuries? Everything we wanted 2 centuries ago, Sarah corrected. But that was then. You showed us what Council membership means. You showed us how you treat those you consider lesser. We learned the lesson. You're being irrational. Your people are scattered across the galaxy, hunted. Scattered? Sarah laughed, and the sound had no humor in it. Counselor, every human in Council space made it home safely. All 217 million of us. We spent 200 years building a network you never saw, ships you never detected, bases you never found. We were planning this withdrawal before my grandmother was born. Veshtar felt something cold settle into his chest. You planned this from the beginning? Not from the beginning, Sarah admitted. At first, we genuinely hoped for acceptance. But after the first 50 years, after the 100th rejection, the 1000th casual insult, we realized the truth. The Council would never see us as equals. So we prepared. We learned everything you knew. We fixed your systems and studied them and improved on them, and we waited. On the tactical display, more human ships were appearing, sliding out from behind moons and asteroids. Not military vessels approaching aggressively, just revealing their presence. A reminder that the humans knew exactly where Veshtar's fleet was, and had known from the moment they entered the system. "Your civilization is collapsing," Veshtar said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Stations are failing, trade routes are closing, species are dying. You did this. You have to fix it." "We did this?" Sarah's pleasant expression hardened. "Counselor, we maintained your infrastructure for 2 centuries. We compensated for design flaws your people were too arrogant to acknowledge. We held your civilization together with skill and dedication, and received nothing but contempt in return. And now that we're gone, now that you're facing the consequences of your own failures, you blame us?" "There will be a war," Veshtar said quietly. "If you don't return, the Council will have no choice. Resources are scarce. Species will fight. Millions will die. Then the Council should learn to fix their own systems. Should learn to value the labor that keeps civilization running. Should learn that there are no lesser species, only different ones. These are lessons you needed to learn, Counselor. The price is high, but some lessons only come through experience." Veshtar was silent for a long moment. He looked past Sarah's image to the planet behind him, to Earth with its orbital platforms and its thriving colonies, and its clear statement that humanity had moved beyond needing the Council. "Please," he said finally, and the word tasted like ash. "Not for the Council, for the innocent. The children on stations without life support. The families on failing colonies. They didn't vote for Resolution 7743. They don't deserve to die for our mistakes." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "No, they don't. Which is why we're not monsters, Counselor. We're not leaving everyone to die. But we're not coming back as servants either." She manipulated something off-screen, and a document appeared on Veshtar's display. "These are the terms. First, the Council formally apologizes and rescinds Resolution 7743. Second, any species that wants human assistance applies directly to the human commonwealth, not through the Council. Third, we establish partnerships, actual partnerships between equals. We teach your engineers to maintain their own systems. We help you fix what's broken, but we do it as free people working with free people. The Council will never accept. The Council will accept, or their civilization will finish collapsing," Sarah said flatly. "We're not negotiating, Counselor. We're stating reality. You need us, we don't need you. These are the terms. Take them to your High Arbiter." The communication ended. Veshtar stood in silence, staring at the planet that had somehow become untouchable. Behind him, Captain Relis cleared her throat. "Orders, Counselor?" "Set course for Zenthara Prime," Veshtar said quietly, "and transmit Sarah Okonkwo's terms to the Council. All of them." As the fleet turned away from Earth, Veshtar took one last look at the blue planet. Somewhere down there, humans were building a civilization that didn't need the Council's approval. They were thriving without the empire that had rejected them. And the Council, that ancient structure of power and tradition, was learning a lesson it should have understood millennia ago. That power comes not just from weapons or wealth or ancient lineage, but from the hands that do the work. The minds that solve the problems, the labor that holds everything together. The humans had withdrawn in silence. Now the galaxy was learning to hear what that silence meant. 5 years after the withdrawal, Dr. Malthan stood in the ruins of what had once been the Galactic Council's central archives on Zenthara Prime. The vast library, which had held 50,000 years of accumulated knowledge, was dark now. Emergency lighting cast shadows across the rows of data storage units that no longer functioned. Malthan was an archaeologist by training, a Pelthian scholar who had spent his life studying the ruins of extinct civilizations. He had never imagined he would be documenting the death of his own. "Record entry 512, he said to his handheld device. "Date, 5 years, 7 months, 13 days since the withdrawal. Location, Central Archives, Zenthara Prime. Status, complete power failure as of yesterday. Estimated data loss, 73% of non-critical archives. He moved deeper into the darkness, his headlamp cutting through the gloom. The archives had been maintained by a team of 300 humans who managed the complex environmental controls that preserved millennia of physical and digital records. When they left, the Council had assumed the systems were automated. They were not. Malthan reached the section he was looking for, historical engineering records. He had been searching for months, following a theory that had formed slowly as he documented the collapse. The theory was simple. The humans had known the infrastructure was failing. They had to have known, which meant they had been fixing problems that predated their arrival. The first document he found confirmed his suspicion. It was a maintenance report, filed 193 years ago, written by a human engineer named Marcus Johnson. The report detailed repairs to the Nexus 7 hyperlane junction. But what caught Malthan's attention was a single line in the middle of the technical description. Compensated for core resonance flaw using harmonic dampening. Note: flaw appears to be original design error from Prelian construction. See attached analysis. The attached analysis was gone, corrupted with the rest of the archives. But Malthan didn't need it. He understood what the line meant. He found more reports, hundreds of them, thousands. Each one documented human engineers discovering and fixing fundamental problems in Council technology. Systems that were slowly failing, catastrophically flawed, built on assumptions that were wrong or incomplete. And the humans, quietly and without fanfare, had fixed them all. They were saving us, Malthan whispered to the darkness. For 200 years, they were saving us from our own mistakes. He continued his search, finding older records now, pre-contact documents that showed the state of Council infrastructure before humanity's arrival. The evidence was damning. Hyperlane efficiency had been dropping for centuries. Station failures were becoming more common. The Pelthian plague, which humans had helped cure, had actually been caused by failing environmental systems on agricultural worlds. The Council civilization had been in slow decline for 1,000 years. The humans had reversed that decline so smoothly that no one had noticed. They had made everything work better, while everyone assumed that was just the natural state of things. Malthan's communicator chimed. He answered to find his research assistant, a young Krythani named Seville, looking excited. "Doctor, I found something. In the sub-basement archives, there's a sealed section that maintained partial power. It has records of council meetings from before the human arrival." 30 minutes later, Malthan stood in the sub-basement, reading documents that made his hands shake. They were sealed council records from 300 years ago, when humanity had first been detected on the edges of council space. The initial reports described humans as technologically primitive, but showing unusual aptitude for reverse engineering. Scout teams had observed human colonies and noted their ability to maintain complex systems with limited resources. One report stated, "Species shows remarkable problem-solving flexibility. Recommend further observation before contact." But then the reports changed. A council economic analysis had projected that bringing humans into council space as maintenance workers would reduce infrastructure costs by 40%. A Vaxil Consortium internal memo suggested that humans could be useful for tasks other species find tedious. The final document was a sealed council resolution from 270 years ago. It outlined a plan to approach humanity with an offer of probationary membership while quietly ensuring they remained in service positions. The resolution included language about managing expectations and maintaining appropriate hierarchies. "They never intended to treat us as equals," Malthan said, his voice hollow. "They brought us in as servants from the beginning." Seville looked at the documents with growing horror. But the humans couldn't have known this. These records were sealed. Malthan thought about the 2 centuries of careful planning, the hidden ships, the secret preparations. Maybe they didn't know. Or maybe they figured it out. Maybe they saw it in every dismissive comment, every rejected proposal, every time someone treated them like they were less than people. He downloaded all the documents, encrypting them carefully. Then he and Seville made their way back to the surface of Zenthara Prime. The station was dying, its population reduced to a fraction of what it had been. The great symbol of council power was becoming a tomb. Outside the archives, Malthan found a changed world. The grand promenades were empty. The diplomatic quarters stood abandoned. Zenthara Prime had been evacuated down to essential personnel only, and even they were preparing to leave. In the 5 years since the withdrawal, the council had fractured. Some species blamed others for the dependency on human labor. Wars had broken out over remaining resources. The Vaxel Consortium, architects of Resolution 7743, had faced revolution. Councillor Shess had been executed by their own people, a scapegoat for the civilization's collapse. Veshtar, the Krithani delegate who had laughed at Ambassador Chen, was now a broken figure living in exile. He had sent Malthan a message weeks ago asking if the archaeologist had found any evidence that humans had sabotaged council systems before leaving. Malthan had reviewed the data carefully and sent back a single word: no. The humans hadn't sabotaged anything. They had simply stopped fixing problems that weren't theirs to fix. Malthan boarded a transport bound for the Pelthian homeworld. During the journey, he compiled his findings into a comprehensive report. He documented the Council's deliberate exploitation. He showed the scale of human contribution. He proved that humanity had held galactic civilization together while being treated as lesser beings. When the report was finished, he transmitted it across every remaining Council communication network. He sent copies to news services, to universities, to government archives. He made sure that everyone who remained in Council space understood the truth. The response was swift and devastating. Species that had supported Resolution 7743 found themselves facing internal revolts. The few remaining Council delegates resigned en masse. High Arbiter Zelnoth, who had presided over the vote that drove humanity away, released a statement accepting full responsibility and then disappeared from public life. But apologies and revolutions couldn't fix the broken infrastructure. The damage was done. The Council's territory had contracted by 60%. Half the hyperlane network was unusable. Hundreds of stations had been abandoned. Civilizations that had stretched across star systems were now confined to their home worlds. A few species, humbled by necessity and genuine remorse, sent formal delegations to Sol system. They went without the Council's blessing, as individual peoples seeking help from another people. Malthan heard that some were accepted, that humans were forming what they called a cooperative network with species who approached them with respect. But the cooperative grew slowly, carefully, with humans vetting each species that applied. They had learned from their experience. They would not be used again. Malthan's final entry in his documentation came 6 years after the withdrawal. He stood on his homeworld, looking up at stars that had once been connected by a web of hyperspace routes. Now those routes were dark, broken, unreachable. "We built an empire on the backs of those we considered beneath us," he recorded. "We thought we were civilized, enlightened, advanced, but we were just arrogant. The humans showed us what we truly were, not through revenge or violence, but by withdrawing their consent. By walking away and letting us face the consequences of our own failures. History will remember this as the era when galactic civilization learned that there are no lesser species, only lesser choices. The cost of that lesson was everything we had built. Whether we learn from it remains to be seen." Then he stopped the recording and looked at the stars again. Somewhere out there, humanity was building something new, something better. And the council that had rejected them was learning to live with the cost. 20 years after the withdrawal, the galaxy looked nothing like it had before. The Galactic Council existed in name only, governing 15% of its former territory from a modest station in the Outer Rim. High Arbiter Zelnoth had been replaced 3 times, each successor presiding over further contraction and diminishment. But across the void, something new was growing. Engineer First Class Maria Santos floated in zero gravity beside her partner, a Felthian technician named Krex, as they worked on a hyperlane junction relay in what was now called cooperative space. Maria's practiced hands moved across the machinery with casual confidence, while Krex monitored diagnostic readouts. "Flow looks good," Krex said, his translator rendering his clicks into standard English. "Much smoother than the old council specifications." "That's because the old specs were garbage," Maria replied cheerfully. "They were trying to force a multi-dimensional quantum system to behave like a simple switch. No wonder everything kept breaking." Krex made a sound that might have been amusement. "I remember when our people first approached yours for help. We were so nervous. We thought you would reject us like we had rejected you." Maria glanced at him. "Were you one of the ones who voted for Resolution 7743? "No. I was too young, but my parents were council representatives. They voted yes." Krex's voice carried shame. "They believed what they were told about humanity being naturally suited for service work. And now you're here, working as an equal with a human, fixing a hyperlane junction," Maria said. "What do your parents think?" "They don't. They died in the collapse, when our station lost life support." Krex was quiet for a moment. "Before they died, they sent me a message. They said they were sorry, that they had been wrong. That I should seek out humans and learn from them if I survived." Maria put a hand on Krex's shoulder, a gesture she had learned he found comforting. "I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm glad you're here." They worked in comfortable silence, 2 beings from different worlds, collaborating on a problem with mutual respect. Around them, cooperative space thrived. Humans had partnered with 12 other species so far, carefully selecting those who approached with genuine humility and willingness to learn. Together they were building something unprecedented, a truly egalitarian society that valued contribution over hierarchy. The cooperative network operated on principles humanity had learned from bitter experience. All species were equal in decision-making. All labor was valued and compensated fairly. Technology was shared freely among partners, and most importantly, anyone who showed contempt for others was removed from the network immediately. It was smaller than the old council, but it worked. The hyperlanes ran smoothly. The stations functioned perfectly. Trade flowed freely, and disputes were resolved through negotiation rather than force. Back on Earth, in the capital city of New Geneva, Sarah Okonkwo sat in her office, reviewing applications from 3 more species seeking to join the cooperative. She was older now, her hair gray at the temples, but her eyes still held the same steel they had when she faced down Counselor Veshtar 2 decades ago. Each application required careful review. The humans had developed extensive criteria for partnership. Did the species treat all its own members equally? Did they have a history of exploitation? Were they willing to learn and adapt? Most importantly, were they approaching the cooperative with respect or merely with need? Sarah approved 1 application, rejected 1, and marked the 3rd for further investigation. Then she pulled up a different file, one she had kept private for years. It was a message from Counselor Veshtar. The message had arrived 3 months ago, routed through multiple channels to reach her. Veshtar was dying, the message explained. His species' lifespan was reaching its natural end. Before he died, He wanted to speak with a human representative. Not to ask for anything, just to talk. Sarah had debated whether to respond. She had little reason to show kindness to the man who had laughed at Ambassador Chen, who had compared humans to waste reclamation units. But she also remembered being young and angry, and learning that holding on to rage only poisoned yourself. She authorized the communication link. He was ancient now, his scales dull, his movements slow. He sat in a small room that looked nothing like the grand quarters he had once occupied on Zenthara Prime. "Ambassador Okonkwo," he said, his voice weaker than she remembered. "Thank you for accepting my call." "Coordinator Okonkwo now," Sarah corrected. "We don't use the title ambassador anymore. It implies hierarchy." Veshtar nodded slowly. "Another lesson I learned too late. There are many such lessons." "Why did you want to talk to me?" Sarah asked, not unkindly. "To tell you that you were right. About everything." Veshtar's claws trembled as he spoke. "I spent 20 years watching the consequences of my arrogance. I saw species starve because we couldn't maintain our own infrastructure. I saw wars break out over resources that used to flow freely. I watched a civilization of 50,000 years crumble because we couldn't do the basic work that humans had done for us." He paused, gathering strength. "But worse than that, I learned what we had lost. Not just your labor, but your perspectives, your solutions, your way of seeing problems. We thought we were the pinnacle of civilization, but we had become stagnant. We solved problems the same way we had for millennia, using the same assumptions, making the same mistakes. You could have given us so much more than maintenance work. You could have helped us grow, but we were too arrogant to see it." Sarah listened without interrupting. She had heard many such apologies over the years, but something in Veshtar's voice suggested this was different. This wasn't someone trying to manipulate humanity into returning. This was genuine understanding, bought at terrible price. "I cannot undo what I did," Veshtar continued. "I cannot bring back the billions who died in the collapse. I cannot restore what we destroyed. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what we did to you, and I understand why you left." "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "Because someone should remember that we learned. The council is gone, but the species that remain need to understand what we did wrong. They need to know that your withdrawal wasn't cruelty, it was consequence. And maybe, if I tell you this, if you pass it along, future generations won't make the same mistakes." Sarah considered his words. "You want me to tell your story? I want you to tell the truth, that we had everything and threw it away because we couldn't see past our own prejudice, that we treated sentient beings as tools and wondered why they stopped working, that we confused tradition with wisdom and paid the price." Veshtar's breathing was labored now. "Tell them that Counselor Veshtar, who laughed at Ambassador Chen, who called humans waste reclamation units, learned too late what it meant to be civilized." The transmission ended shortly after. Sarah learned 2 days later that Veshtar had died peacefully, his last act to record a formal apology that was distributed across what remained of council space. Sarah added the recording to the growing archive of testimonies, documents, and evidence that tracked the rise and fall of the Galactic Council. Humanity was building a comprehensive historical record, not out of vindictiveness, but because the lesson was too important to forget. Across cooperative space, life continued. Stations hummed with activity. Children of different species played together in schools that taught cooperation rather than hierarchy. Engineers and scientists of multiple races collaborated on projects that pushed the boundaries of knowledge. The galaxy had reorganized. The cooperative network controlled perhaps 20% of known space. The remnant council territories accounted for another 15%. The rest was divided among independent species, regional coalitions, and unaffiliated worlds, each finding their own path forward. It was messy. It was complicated. It was nothing like the ordered hierarchy of the old council. It was also more honest. Maria Santos finished her work on the hyperlane junction and powered up the system. The diagnostic readouts glowed green across the board. She and Krex high-fived, a human gesture he had adopted with enthusiasm. "Another junction restored," Maria said. "How many more to go?" 17 in this sector, Krex replied. "Then we move on to the Pelthian reconstruction project." Maria smiled. "Then let's get moving. We've got work to do." They packed their tools and boarded their ship, two equals building something better than what had come before. Behind them, the junction pulsed with steady light, a small piece of infrastructure that would carry travelers safely through the void. On Earth, Sarah Okonkwo filed Veshtar's testimony and pulled up the next application for cooperative membership. The work of building a better civilization was never finished, but that was all right. Humanity had learned patience during their 2 centuries of service. They had learned the value of slow, careful work done right. They had learned that the most important infrastructure wasn't the hyperlanes or stations or machines. It was the relationships between people, the mutual respect and recognition that all beings deserved dignity. The galaxy was smaller now than it had been in the Council's glory days, but it was also more honest, more equitable, more willing to value the labor that made everything else possible. Humanity had withdrawn in silence, and the Galactic Council had suffered the cost. But, from that suffering, a new galaxy was being born. Not perfect, not utopian, but better than what came before. And that was enough. In the depths of space, between the stars where old trade routes once ran, a human ship and a Felthian vessel flew side by side. They were heading to a broken station to restore it, working together as equals, building the future, one repair at a time. The humans had come home when the Council rejected them. Now, slowly, carefully, they were helping others build homes too. The work continued.